We are so glad you joined us today to get centered, but we have a disclaimer. Being centered really is more of an aspiration than a destination. This is a vodcast where we'll be discussing all things mind and body, mental health, physical well-being, parenting, marriage, healthy touch, anger and how to handle it. What is integrative medicine? How do I meditate? What are we learning from COVID in this quarantine experience? Where do we go from here? You have questions on these topics, and we ask those same questions ourselves. So this isn't a vodcast full of answers. It's one full of discussion, because we're going to tell you right now we do not have all the answers, but we do love a rich discussion and hope you do too. We're Leila Scott and John Price, the founders of the Center for Healing Arts and Sciences, and this vodcast is hosted by our amazing team, which is comprised of an integrative group of therapists offering individual, couples, family, depth therapy, and offers support groups for men, women, teens, young professionals, and others. Chinese medicine practitioners offering acupuncture, herbal medicine, food therapy, lifestyle advice, and last but not least, our mindfulness meditation and spirituality guide. Be sure to reach out to us to let us know other topics you'd like to hear us discuss, or to let us know if you'd like to work with our integrative team. We are here for you and offering virtual care as well as home delivery of wellness self-care packages during this time of physical separation. Give us a shout at 713-526-4444 and be sure to follow us on social at Center for HAS. And now, please enjoy the show.
Well, hello, folks. Welcome back to Get Centered, and welcome back to this wonderful team. How you guys doing today? Good. I've just been spending about 10 minutes talking about our conversation today, and we're going to move into some interesting territory. Our title for the day, our topic is the cost of convenience. And of course, there's a lot of different interpretations for this, but as I was thinking through this subject, I remembered a letter that Joseph Campbell read at the beginning of The Power of Myth. It's a reference to Chief Seathl. It's around 1855, and it's a letter he had written to the president. And I want to start today in the same way that Joseph Campbell started that conversation, with reading the letter. It's brief, but I think it's important as we move into this very intense, curious, and transformative period of time that we're in. So again, this is to President Franklin Pierce of the United States from Chief Seathl in 1855. The great chief in Washington sends word that he wishes to buy our land. The great chief also sends us words of friendship and goodwill. This is kind of him, since we know that he has little need of our friendship in return. But we will consider your offer, for we know that if we do not do so, the white man may come with guns and take our land. How can you buy or sell the sky, the warmth of the land? The idea is strange to us. Yet we do not own the freshness of the air or the sparkle of the water. How can you buy them from us? Every part of this earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every clearing and humming insect is holy in the memory and experience of my people. We know that the white man does not understand our ways. One portion of the land is the same to him as the next, for he is a stranger who comes in the night and takes from the land whatever he needs. The earth is not his brother, but his enemy. And when he has conquered it, he moves on. His appetite will devour the earth and leave behind only a desert. The sight of your cities pains the eyes of the red man, but perhaps it is because the red man is a savage and does not understand. If I decide to accept, I will make one condition. The white man must treat the beasts of his land as his brother. What is man without beasts? If all the beasts were gone, men would die from great loneliness of spirit. For whatever happens to the beasts also happens to man. One thing we know, from which the white man may one day discover, our God is the same God. You may think that you own him as you wish to own our land, but you cannot. He is the God of men, and he is compassion, and it is equal for the red man and the white man. The earth is precious to him, and to harm the earth is to heap contempt on its creator. The whites too shall pass, perhaps sooner than other tribes. Continue to contaminate your bed, and you will one night suffocate in your own waste. When the buffaloes are all slaughtered, the wild horses all tamed, the sacred corner of the forest heavy with the scent of men, and the view of the ripe hills blotted by talking wives where there's thicket. Where is the eagle? And what is it to say goodbye to the shift and the hunt, and the end of the living and the beginning of the dying. There's no quiet place in the white man's cities, no place to hear the leaves of spring or the rustling of the insect wings. But perhaps because I'm a savage and do not understand, the clatter only seems to insult the ears. And what is there to life if a man cannot hear the lovely cry of the whippoorwill or the argument of the frogs around a pond at night? The red Indian prefers the soft sound of the wind itself, cleansed by the midday rain, or scented with a pine. The air is precious to the red man, for all things share the same breath: the beasts, the trees, the man. The white man does not seem to notice the air he breathes. Like a man dying for many days, he is numb to the smell. We might understand if we know what the white man dreams, what he hopes to describe to his children on long winter nights, what visions he burns into their minds, so that they will wish for tomorrow. But we are savages. The white man's dreams are hidden from us. And because they are hidden, we will go on our own way. If we agree, it will be to secure our reservations you have promised. There, perhaps, we may live out our brief days as we wish. When the last red man vanished from the earth, and the memory is only the shadow of a cloud moving across the prairie, these shores and forests will still hold the spirits of my people, for they love this earth as the newborn loves its mother's heartbeat. If we sell our land, love it as we loved it, care for it as we have cared for it. Hold in your mind the memory of the land as it is when you take it, and with all your strength, with all your might, and with all your heart, preserve it for your children, and love it as God loves us all. One thing we know, your God is the same God. The earth is precious to him. Even the white man cannot be exempt from the common destiny. Whew.
Dog the Beast has something to say about it too.
I know the dog. Yeah, the big dog is barking in the background. It made me think about the difference between that and in Genesis, the Judeo-Christian myth that talks about having dominion over man and animal. And I just quickly, this is only a brief portion to kind of get us moving. He says, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. God said, see, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. I think as we talk about, two things come to mind with convenience, which is technology, of course, and overpopulation. And we continue to grow and find ways to live together and be together and try to figure out what life means to us on an individual and a collective level, and how we seek happiness and what is happiness. And so these two stories really come to me as deeply in conflict. And so today we're just going to talk about the various ways that these costs of convenience manifest, I think, both systemically and socially, but also individually and psychologically. And so I want to plant that seed for you guys and see where we go. Who's got a thought first?
You know, knowing me so well, that the whole dominion versus stewardship issue is a big one for me, being an animal lover and somebody who eats meat also. You know, I want to call out my own hypocrisy potentially. But yeah, just that interpretation, and I'm not an expert on the Bible, but my understanding is that translation of the word dominion is actually potentially not what was meant, that it was actually an intention of stewardship. And because we took the wrong interpretation and ran with it, I mean, that goes all the way down. I mean, to connect to the food, of course, the way we treat our animals, it's much easier to excuse ourselves if we tell ourselves we have dominion. It's not as easy to excuse the way we behave in terms of how the giant slaughterhouses are run, etc., if we remember and are reminded of the fact that we potentially are meant to be stewards and brothers and sisters with these other beasts.
I think it's fun that we actually have an expert on these texts with us.
I'm by no means an expert on this. you know, it's interesting, number one, that the rabbis see, I mean, the ones who I'm going to call out right now, the rabbis see Genesis as pretty explicitly not a historic book and not necessarily even an instructive book, but more as uh, a sort of like a myth. Like, right, exactly that. It's a myth of our people that helps us. Hopefully, we gather some value out of it and learn how to be better in the world from it, right? So that's like automatically when you take it out of the space of fundamental, it sort of changes the tone of whatever you read in there. And I feel like there is definitely a desire to read the Bible from a fundamental, like, well, it says X, right? And then just what you said, Leela Scott, right? It's like, yeah, it says that maybe, because like the Hebrew, when you go back to the actual original, if you look at a really critical scholarship of the Hebrew, so many times there's an asterisk there, and you look at the bottom, it says meaning of Hebrew uncertain, right? That doesn't happen in a fundamental reinterpretation. In a fundamental interpretation, it says dominion. In I don't know specifically on this word, but like when you look at a critical scholarship of it, they say asterisk. Like, we're gonna use a word here, but I don't know. We're not sure, right? Because the Hebrew is very complicated. So that's one. That's just like that's. I think that's where I'll kind of leave it on that one,
Yeah.
just to kind of back up a little bit. Um, yeah, I think there's more. I have more to say, but that's the basic Bible piece of that.
Thank you for that. I still think you're an expert.
Mhm.
Uh, I think what you're getting at, Ariel, is that essentially both of these central philosophies get at a worldview, and we've all got a worldview. And when we don't have an internalized sense of worldview, we outsource for it. And so we look outside of ourselves and say, well, what should I do? So as human beings, we're always looking for a sense of orientation, because when we're disoriented, it's very anxiety provoking. And so given that bias, we're constantly looking out to others, and we're highly influenced by what other people are doing and their worldviews. And even that is a convenience, which is, rather than introspecting and looking inward and figuring out where I stand on this, I just kind of bias toward what you stand, which is what you're talking about, Ariel. That kind of fundamentalist viewpoint, like, just tell me what to do.
Well, because
Tell me how to be.
it'd be so much easier, right? Like,
Good.
God, please just take out the difficulty, right? It's like, can we just? I use God, but that's a bad way to say it, right? But it's kind of like, it's like, can we just make it simple? Can you just make it easy, right? Just tell me what to do. Can you just tell me what to do? That's it. That's all I want. Just give me the playbook, right?
Yeah.
Why do I have to struggle here? But that's, there's a
Yeah, but
price. There's a price for that. Yeah, go ahead, Nat. Yeah.
no, I was just gonna say, I think that's what I took away. It's speaking on that ease, that convenience, right? That's what I heard in that first letter, is that we're becoming so just present, immediate thinking, right? Like, okay, well, I don't feel like cooking, so I'm going to go get fast food because it's easier. And I'm not thinking long term about how that crap is terrible for my body, because I'm just thinking about in the moment, right? Like, I want someone to tell me to do something right now because it's just easier. I don't have to think about it because I'm not worrying about the repercussions of it. And that's the state of where our world is right now, right? Like, we kept doing all of these things because of the comfort, because of settling, because everything else was too difficult or too hard. And now we're dealing with the aftermath of all of those easy decisions.
Yeah, and to speak of the cost of that fast food, I mean, it's cheaper when we're considering our pocketbook, but it's much more expensive when we consider the extra cost, and people don't realize that. And then in some cases, they're a bit of a prisoner to that. They really can't afford anything else, right? So there's that. But then we extrapolate that into the way we approach our health. We want to outsource that as well. we talked last week a little bit about how it's a harder lifestyle. It's more difficult to do your own investigating and not just rely upon what you're hearing or somebody else say. And that shows up even in treatment rooms, where after developing a rapport with the patient, I start to try to involve the patient with their own healing. And they look at me at first and say, well, God, you're the expert. You're the doc. Like, you do it. You tell me. And there has to be this complete re-education around, no, this is your body and you have an incredible amount of intuition that you have forgotten that you have, and you get to participate in this. And it's meant to be empowering, but at first it can feel really scary that there's a responsibility we have as an individual.
I tell this to my clients all the time. I'm not going to work harder than you are in session, because that'll just provoke all my anxiety and whatever else for myself. And why am I working harder when it's, you know, those actions you create or those responses that are coming from you? Like, why am I working harder to elicit those and bring those up for you, when you're just kind of making them numb for yourself and you're not letting yourself experience them? It kind of feels like a cop-out. It's just kind of like, okay, you want to invest your time in this, but not invest the value of exploring those values and exploring yourself. And it just becomes one of those things where it's like, okay, let's say wearing a mask, right? Is it a cost of convenience or is it a necessity? Some people think it's a necessity. Some people have been educated where it's a convenience. So then where do we draw the line? So
that is what we hear, right? It's an inconvenience to do that, right? And there's a cost. I mean, we're seeing it. It's irrefutable, right? I mean, of course, people are going to refute the statistics, and that's kind of what I see a lot all over the place, where there's questions about statistics. And I don't know you guys, but I had in my master's and my PhD, I had about a year of statistics in both. And I'm still confused about how to really get deep into that. And I have 2 graduate degrees that went deeply into statistics. And I know enough to know that I don't know a lot about statistics. And so when I see numbers like that, I have to push into it to try to figure out what they're really trying to say. Because there are ways to we even did this, it's like in psychology school, you know, they talk about the ways in which you ask a question can determine the answer. And so the ways in which you present information can determine a conclusion, and you can predict that. And people know this because they study it. But for most of us, we don't study it and we don't want to. And that's fine, you know, like, okay, but at least know that you don't know that. And I think that's what comes down to it. It's like, I pick convenience all over the place. I mean, I've got windows and air conditioning and light bulbs in here, and that's certainly convenient to keep the bugs away and the heat out. But I know what's happening there. And that's, I think the point is, if you're going to do it consciously. We need to know how our decisions impact things upstream and downstream. And I think that's one of the greatest costs of convenience, is that we're detached. We begin to become separated from that process of the connection between upstream and downstream.
It's a question of body, mind, soul to me. We're talking about the idea of context. And when something is taken out of context and we don't see it in relationship to anything else. I mean, like Leela Scott was saying, when we disconnect from our bodies, we have symptoms. When we disconnect from meaning or soulful work, we have symptoms. If we just try to put everything down to, you know, what's going on in our head, if we identify with our thoughts, then again, we're taking something out of a larger context. So, and it's not that those things are untrue. It's just that if they're not contextualized, then they actually lose their kernel of truth, because their truth is dependent upon, you know, the larger meaning. So when, you know, someone comes into my practice and there's soul symptoms, there are body symptoms, and it's because the mind, body, and soul don't have a way to connect to each other. And that's what, you know, the letter was saying, this idea of ownership instead of being in the context of nature like we are, is the problem, is incredibly problematic. And we're living that out now. I mean, I really resist anyone trying to pontificate about what the coronavirus means. But if it means anything, it's that we cannot escape our unity. Ultimately, as a global people, we can look away from it if we want. But if we don't recognize it in a positive way, it will show up in a negative way, just to remind us, to make sure we get the point.
But go into that positive thing, though. Say more about if we don't recognize it in a positive way.
If we don't, the idea of, and back to the idea of masks, just like Gia was saying, if we don't understand our context with other people. So the idea of wearing a mask is the idea that I might need to protect someone around me. I'm also protecting myself, but I'm protecting those around me. Therefore, we feel in the context of the people that we're cohabitating with, on a small scale. Also on a large scale, if we feel responsibility to those around us, then, we're taking care of, the spread of the virus can be contained if people are hyper responsible of acknowledging what's there, acknowledging that it can be spread, and acknowledging the effect on other people. Again, what you're saying about upstream, downstream, but that's a larger context that is not convenient.
So maybe it's not a convenience to ourselves, but it'll give a convenience to other people, which we don't want to provide that convenience to other people, because what am I getting out of it?
Right.
Usually nothing. Or if I am getting something out of it, it's not what I want. And so we're constantly chasing after the next new thing, which it's funny because we kind of go back to, if you look at like social media and stuff like that, a lot of people are kind of rewinding and going back to like the 90s and the 80s and wanting that style and that feeling and that connection, as opposed to like all the newness. And it's just funny, like the bell-bottom jeans and all like the different styles, and that was the one thought that kind of popped into my mind. Why are people rewinding to that time? But it's also like there was more connection back then because there was less internet stuff. Everyone was outside running around, or playing more, talking to each other more. So
Yeah, thirst for that relationship.
yeah.
Having an aha moment while y'all were talking that, I've always felt aware, given that I work with the elements, that I'm reminded a lot that we are of nature, not just spectators of nature, but I still fall prey to being a human and separating myself too. But that the separation from nature and the way we have come to treat nature as a people is that the nature is the other. We're not working together, we're working against each other. And the aha moment piece is that being separated from nature is actually causing us to be separated from each other. And now we see each other as the other. That it's very much more related, the two things, than I had ever realized before this moment.
I see that as like part of this kind of move that we do internally that I'm sort of constantly trying to remind myself, which is like, there is really no difference between me and the outside. I don't maybe want that to be me, right? I don't want the person who I term as like evil to be like part of me, right? And if my worldview is such that I can other them, then it's really nice actually, because then I can just other them and I don't have to deal with it. But if my worldview is actually, and I think this is what the letter is saying, is like, you don't understand that there's like one thing going on here, which is whatever that divine universe force is, right? That's what this picture is trying to sort of like get at. It's like that majesty is what's in you and in every cell of your body and every one of us. And that's one thing, right? You cannot other yourself from it, whether you like it or not, right? You can for certain amounts of time, but then we get into and you can feel, oh, we're just separate, right? And then you get into a pandemic, and all of a sudden, like Rodney's saying, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm connected to every other human in this earth, whether I like them or agree with them or don't, or like, oh yeah, wait a second, this earth is like really just one small place?
But what's so fascinating about this, if again, with all of that inside of us, developmentally, we have to separate. So there is a period of time, where a kid, some of their first words, other than identifying who their caregiver is, their first words are mine and no. There's a possession and there's a differentiation that happens. And so the child is learning how to separate themselves from their environment and say like, oh, I'm an autonomous being and I can have an effect on the world and I matter and I have worthiness or not, and I can trust or not. And so that microcosm is consistently in us. That ability to separate ourselves and become an individual, which, to your point, Ariel, we never really are. We have just had to divide ourselves from the kind of unified field in order to become a unique person, but hopefully to then only realize that we're a part of that unified field, and our work becomes connecting to that as a both and, as both an individual and a collective part of the body.
Makes me wonder if just as a people we're 2 years old. You know what I mean? In the grand developmental scheme of things, humans are 2 years old.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the stage we have to go through to separate from mom.
Well, even in a relational standpoint, I just keep thinking about how, okay, we've talked even about how when we have these difficult conversations of who can we have it with, because it's going to ruin someone's relationship with me, or I'm going to push the wrong buttons, or even in terms of convenience, right? I've had so many individuals or couples who come into sessions who are like, I am unsatisfied in my relationship. I just realized that I just settled for someone because it was easy, because I didn't want to have to date anymore. How many times I have people who tell me that, wow, like I have a bunch of shallow friends because I grew up with them. We had similar memories and I never really realized our values don't align. And now what do I do? Right. And people are in this moment of, oh shit, like I settled, or oh shit, I didn't question or try harder to push myself to step out of those boundaries, to really align with people who I have similar thinkings with, who I have the same values as. And I think right now we're kind of in that same relational standpoint with the world of, oh shit, I haven't been making the right decisions, the right actions, and now I'm dealing with that impact and I have to do something about it. Right? Like when couples come into my sessions, they'll say like, it's your fault. And then they point at me and want me to just kind of wave a magic wand and fix their problems. And I'm like, whoa, like, let's take a step back and see like, what was it that I did that influenced this? And what is it that I have to do to start changing that trajectory? Because if we keep waiting for somebody else to pick up the ball on the court, then we're just going to keep sitting there and waiting for a change to happen because we're hoping that somebody else does it for us.
Yeah, this is the 3 A's: anxiety, ambivalence, and ambiguity. Where I mean, how many of us have worked with folks that are at that point in their life where they are well aware that they need a career change or a significant change in their lives, but then all that self-talk around, well, but I got a paycheck, or I got, the familiar, and it's, it makes sense to me, and yet their soul is really calling for a larger experience. But it's getting undercut by convenience. God, that would be horrendous, and all the shit that would have to happen, and I don't know. And so we're choosing sameness and lethargy and some degree of apathy, as opposed to anxiety and fear and change. And again, in these micro levels, that is a convenience that we are oftentimes. Say what?
I think it's an illusion of convenience.
It's so true. I think that's a massive point. Yes. So because we're still conflicted, we're all, messed up, and, addictive patterns start, and all kinds of real shadowy things begin. But, so you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.
Yeah. And I wanted to go back and speak to what you said a minute ago, Nat, around like the old friendships and things like that, and choosing people that are more aligned value-wise. Obviously it makes sense to kind of circle up, right, with people that have similar values. And I think that's a piece of human nature. But what I want to question there is that's also a convenience potentially, because if we're only in our little echo chambers of agreement, what are we missing? And so to hang on to not suggesting that you're saying to like let them go, but hanging on to the relationships that where there seems to be a clear difference, at least in the expression of those values. I mean, maybe when you get down underneath, they are the same values, but our understandings of how to protect those values are different. And so maybe when somebody votes differently or speaks around a topic differently or what have you. I just wanted to put that out there.
Oh, absolutely. I just meant it more in the sense of when we realize we're dissatisfied about something, it's then our responsibility to do something about it, right? Like if we're surrounded by people that we feel are bringing us down, I'm thinking more of those like toxic relationships, right? Mm-hmm. That's when we have to recognize, okay, well, do I just stick with this because it's familiar and it's known, or do I have to finally make a change and shift something, especially like what John said about work, right? At what point do I realize, am I just doing this out of convenience or practicality, or do I want to have a renewal, have an awakening? I keep thinking of the quote Ceci told me a while back is, the only way out is through, right? Like the only way to really get through a difficult situation is to bear that discomfort and having that hope and optimism and just trust in yourself that it will get better.
So I want to, Leah, I know you probably
sorry.
I just,
everybody.
We're all so excited.
Mine's short. I just was going to say that I think that goes back to the illusion that life is supposed to be easy, and that any challenge is this obstacle that we're supposed to run away from, instead of, oh, okay, well, life is challenging. Of course this feels challenging. Now let me go through and meet this challenge, see what comes.
It's all wrapped up in fear too, I think, because it's like, well, I know this, right? That is unknown. That's scary, right? Mm-hmm. And then it really, I think, does come back to that little 2-year-old thing, right? There's a little 2-year-old inside that goes, no, I don't like that, right? And then we just are paralyzed by that sometimes. But that's the beauty of coming to, to therapy, coming to acupuncture, coming to start to learn the meditation arts, is because it's that you find this person sitting across from you who's traveled the road, right? It's not like you want to go down that road. You don't know how, right? And then you can find somebody who can, like one of us, are going to be there for you to say, like, I'm here with you, right? Yes, I'm traveling down that road too. Come with me, right? And we're going to be there with you. We're not like, I don't know, we're kind of like Sherpas, right? We're sort of been there. And we're going to help you find your way so you don't have to be lost in all that.
So we got to finish today, but we can, of course, start this next week. For those of you watching, tune in next week, and we'll have another topic, but we'll certainly pick up the threads we left today. The one thing I want to drop on you as we finish is I was doing an interview about a year ago with a guy who's doing a documentary on the music business, and he's in the San Francisco area, and talked about what's going on with all the tech that's out there. He said a guy got up at one of those conferences at Google or Amazon and said that he can actually show, by looking at data from cell phones and mapping cell phones, he's like, I can estimate when a female is menstruating because of the changes in behaviors. He gets up and says this. They know, they have the ability to track, to know what we're doing, and that may be fine, because there are many of us that say, I'm not doing anything wrong. But what happens when those powers are abused? They take advantage of communities that are vulnerable. And so for any of us just to say, I'm not doing anything wrong, that's, to your point, Rodney, that's out of context. We're not understanding what happens downstream. And I think that the main objective of this kind of conversation is to get us thinking about how our behaviors affect each other, affect the environment, affect our world, and then affect our own hearts and our relationships to our inner world. So thanks, guys. Another fun and enriching conversation, and we will see you next week.